So you would like to know how to grout a mosaic? Well, you're in the right place. I'm Helen Miles and I'm here to teach you all the tips and tricks you need to make mosaics. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to grout this direct method mosaic, which I have made using unglazed Winkleman's ceramic tiles, like these ones. You can get these tiles from any mosaic supplier, and they come in a lovely range of soft colours. I've made the mosaic on Jacco board, which is a kind of compressed foam board used for lining bathrooms, and you can find it in any tile supplier. So this is what it looks like before the mosaic has been added to it. So if you see from the side, that's obviously the compressed foam. And it's a great substrate because it's very, very lightweight and versatile. So another name for it is weddy board. I have made a separate video about 7 mosaic substrates, which tells you all about the board. So if you'd like to know more about it, then please watch that video. The direct method involves sticking the tiles directly onto the board using a strong adhesive. And once the mosaic is dry, it will be time to grout it. And by grouting, I mean simply filling the gaps or the interstices between the tiles. So let's get started. First of all, let's look at what you need to grout your mosaic. You need to remember that grouting mosaics is messy. So the first thing you'll need is a ground sheet, something to protect your table, and probably also something under the table to protect from splashes. So of course old newspaper will do. You also need a clean, dry paintbrush. Then, of course, you need grout. I use this BAL Micromax 2 wall and floor grout for joints from 1mm to 20mm. The colour of this particular one is called Smoke, which is a mid-grey, which I find works best with the Winkleman's tiles. A darker grey would subdue the already muted colours of the tiles, and a whiter colour would put too much emphasis on the cracks, on the interstices between the tiles. So I find that this mid-grey works best with Winkleman's. Don't forget to read the manufacturer's instructions or information to make sure that the grout you have chosen is suitable for the position where the mosaic will be placed. So this grout is suitable for interior and exterior, which is just what I want. Then you need gloves and a dust mask. It's tempting to use latex gloves for grouting just because they are tight-fitting. But of course they are single-use plastic and so best avoided, and these kitchen gloves work perfectly well. As you can see, I've used them many times before. This is a fairly fancy dust mask, but you can just use a much simpler, cheaper one. Just be sure to wear one. It's really important when you're mixing fine powder like grout. Then you need an old spoon, a bowl or tub to mix the grout in. The mosaic I'm making is only 40 centimetres by 40 centimetres, which is fairly small, so this small tub is perfectly sufficient. Then you need a container of water to add to the grout and something to stir the grout with. I'm just going to use the same spoon that I'm measuring the grout out with. But if you are making a larger quantity of grout, you might want a proper trowel like this one for mixing the grout. Next you need a spreader for spreading the grout. This is just an old loyalty card, which is perfect. And then you'll need another larger container, like a bucket, full of clean water for when we get to the cleaning stage. And then one of these big fat multi-sided sponges. These are great for the purpose. They're sold in hardware shops in the car section for car washing, and are wonderful because they have different sides, which is very important. Nice thick sides, which you'll see in a moment why that matters. And then lastly, you need a scrubbing brush to clean up the dry mosaic at the end. And make sure your brush has hard bristles. These are plastic bristles, which is great. So first of all, I'm going to give this dry, clean, completed mosaic a good shake. It's kind of hard to shake under the camera, but anyway, if I could, I'd flip it over and give it a good shake to make sure there are no loose bits and that any debris that's fallen in between the tiles has come out. And then I'll brush it with my clean dry brush, just for an extra layer of precaution to get rid of dust and anything else which might have gathered. Then you make the grout. Ideally, you do this outside because it's dusty and messy. I'm going to put my dust mask on now, so I'm going to sound a bit weird. And obviously, I'm wearing the rubber gloves. And for this mosaic, I estimate that I need about 4 or 5 heaped tablespoons of grout. And it's about 300 grams. A bit extra. Yeah, it's better to have leftovers than not have enough. Then I'm going to add the water very slowly. Remember, you can use a spritzer further on into the process to fine-tune the adding of the water. And I'm just going to use the same spoon because I'm not really mixing very much. But if you're making a larger quantity, you'd want to use something like this, a sturdier trowel. So I'm just mixing the grout and the water. So what I'm aiming for, oops, I'm just taking my mask off. What I'm aiming for is a kind of peanut butter-like thick paste without a sheen of water on the top. And I don't know if that shows up here, but there is a little sheen, so just a little bit too soft. So I'm going to add some more grout. So now I'm adding more grout in order to get the right consistency. And still I've got that sheen. So I'm just going to add in a teeny tiny bit just to take the sheen off. That's much better. It's a malleable paste like peanut butter. So now I'm going to leave it for 5 minutes to slake, which basically means just to sit. So this is a difficult bit psychologically. You take this rather nasty looking cementy stuff and plop it onto your mosaic. Oh dear. And then you use your spreader, my loyalty card, and spread it firmly all over the front of the mosaic. So I'm pushing quite hard because I want the grout to go right down into all the gaps. So you carry on doing that until the whole of the mosaic is covered. So be careful on the edges. You can see it's quite easy to accidentally skip and get not get the grout into the edges. So you're filling up all the holes. So your fingers are useful tools for bits that it's difficult to get into. And also, again, use your handy finger to do the sides. So this is a little bit difficult to show you under the camera, but basically you're just spreading the grout along the sides in a thin layer just to hide the foam. Okay, now I've completely covered the mosaic in grout and covered the edges with my finger. So now I'm going to remove the excess grout. So again, I'm pushing quite hard. I don't want any excess grout on the surface of the mosaic, because the more you have, the longer and more difficult it will be to clean. So really thoroughly remove the excess grout. And as you're doing it, you'll see, I don't know if you can see it there, probably not because of the angle. Oops, you can't see it at all because the camera doesn't show it. But anyway, you'll have tiny, potentially tiny little holes as you remove the grout. You'll see them. And then, of course, at this stage, you can just fill them as you go. Here I'm just quickly cleaning the area where I was working, because of course I don't want grout to be on the back of the mosaic. So here's my tub of clean water, and I'm dipping the sponge into the water, making sure it's nice and full of water, and then squeezing every last drop out of it. So you want the sponge to be damp but have no excess water. So it needs a bit of strength here. You're really squeezing it. Ooh. Sorry about the sound effects. There we go. Now I'm going to take my clean, almost dry, well damp but no excess water sponge, and run one side of it across the front of the mosaic. Then I'm going to turn it over and use the other side. So you're always using a clean side of the sponge. And that's where these thick sponges come in handy, because I still have the 4 other sides. So once the sponge has been used, oops, I can use a bit of that, used on all 6 sides, then rinse it out and do the same thing again. So now I've wiped it twice all over using the 6 sides of the sponge, and at this point you've got very little grout coming up on the sponge. You see? So don't forget again to do the edges gently, because you don't want to wipe the grout off. You're just smoothing it. Now your mosaic is ready to leave to dry. And I don't know if you can see, but there is a little bit of residue on the surface. And you'll never get rid of that while the mosaic is wet, because all you're doing is drawing that residue across the mosaic with your sponge. So you're going to leave that until the mosaic is dry, and that's where our stiff scrubbing brush comes in handy. So I always like to leave mosaics for 24 hours to dry. If you're living in a really hot country, I might wrap it for a few hours in plastic just to prevent the grout drying too quickly. Just a quick word on cleaning your tools and any containers, including the water tub that you've used for rinsing out the sponge. So obviously with any container you can just scrape it off and put any residue straight into the bin. And then when you've scraped it all away, you can just use a kitchen towel to get rid of the excess. So that's relatively easy to do. With the tub of water, you've obviously got the residue at the bottom. Well, it's immersed in the water. So what you need to do is to wait until that residue has settled so that you can pour off the water and then do the same with the kitchen towel just to get rid of the residue. What you must not do under any circumstances is put anything related to grout anywhere near drains. So it can be quite tricky if you're living in a flat or don't have access to an outdoor area. But believe me, it's not a good idea to put anything in the drain because it's basically a cement compound and it will block your drains. So it's now 24 hours later and the mosaic is completely dry. So now you can see better the little bits of residue left on the surface after it dries. So what you're going to do is take your stiff scrubbing brush, and I've just dipped it in water so it's slightly wet, and I'm going to give the mosaic a good scrub. So you keep going like this until all the residue comes off and then leave it to dry again. If you like this video and you'd like to see more, then please subscribe below.